The autumn air smelled like crisp leaves and distant rain as 9-year-old Sarah walked home from school that Tuesday afternoon. She kicked at the golden foliage scattered across the sidewalk, her mind wandering through the usual adolescent thoughts, her upcoming math test, whether Jake noticed her at lunch, what her mother had promised to make for dinner. But when she turned onto Maple Street and saw her house, something felt different. She couldn't quite articulate why, but a strange sensation settled in her chest like a stone. Sarah's mother was standing in the front yard, staring at the mailbox with a puzzled expression. She wore her work blouse, untucked and wrinkled in a way that was entirely unlike her. Had always been the organized one, the mother who coordinated color-coded calendars and meal plans. She prided herself on appearing put together, even after 10-hour shifts at the marketing firm downtown. "Mom," Sarah called out, approaching cautiously, "why are you home so early?" Turned, and for a moment, just a fraction of a second, her eyes seemed unfocused, as though she was looking at Sarah without actually seeing her. Then her face brightened with recognition and she smiled. "Oh, Sarah, hi honey, I needed to step outside for a moment. Work was overwhelming today." It was a reasonable explanation, but something about the way her mother said it felt rehearsed, like she was reading lines from a script she'd just memorized. Sarah wanted to ask more, but her mother was already moving toward the door. That evening at dinner, Sarah noticed the first concrete oddity. Her father, Michael, told a story about a funny incident that had happened at his architecture firm, something about a client who accidentally ordered windows that were far too small for the building design. Laughed at the story, genuinely amused. 10 minutes later, as they were clearing dishes, she turned to Michael and said, "Hey, did you hear about that funny thing with your client today? The window mix-up." Michael exchanged a glance with Sarah. "Yes, honey, I just told you that 5 minutes ago." Oh, looked momentarily embarrassed. "Did you? I'm sorry. My mind is like scrambled eggs lately. Work has been so demanding. I've been staying up late on the Henderson campaign, and I think it's catching up with me." Sarah said nothing, but she filed the moment away in her mental notebook. Adults forgot things sometimes. That was normal. Her father often retold stories he'd already shared, but there was something different about this. Something that made the back of Sarah's neck prickle with an inexplicable anxiety. Over the following weeks, the incidents like unwelcome weeds growing through cracks in concrete. Sarah's mother forgot that she'd already scheduled Sarah's soccer practice. On Thursday evening, drove to pick up Sarah at her game, showing up an hour and a half early. When Sarah called, confused, her mother seemed disoriented about the actual practice time. "But I have it written down here," had said, her voice tight with frustration. Sarah heard the sound of papers rustling. Later, Sarah discovered the calendar entry was correct, but her mother had somehow become convinced it was a different time. Then came the phone incident. Sarah's mother received a call from her mother, Sarah's grandmother, asking how the Thanksgiving planning was going. Seemed confused during the call. After hanging up, she told Sarah's father, "Your mother is being strange. She's asking about Thanksgiving dinner, but we literally just talked about this yesterday." Michael retrieved the phone records. The last call from Sarah's grandmother had been 3 weeks prior, not yesterday. The forgotten items piled up like snow in a blizzard. Sarah's mother's favorite reading glasses, misplaced repeatedly, only to be found in the refrigerator. Her phone left at the grocery store, discovered when they received a call from the manager. A dentist appointment missed entirely, the office calling to confirm rescheduling. At first, Sarah tried to mention these things casually. She brought it up to her father one afternoon when they were making sandwiches for lunch. "Dad, I've noticed Mom seems kind of forgetful lately. Like, really forgetful." Michael smiled in that way adults do when they think a child is overreacting. "Your mom's just been working hard on this big campaign at work. Stress does that to people, squirt. When I'm designing a major project, I can barely remember my own name." "But this is different," Sarah pressed. "She forgot that she drove me to soccer last week. She thought it was a different day." "Everyone makes mistakes with schedules, Sarah. I've done that a million times." He ruffled her hair affectionately. "I'm sure your mom's fine, just stressed." Sarah wasn't convinced, but she dropped it. If her father wasn't concerned, what could she do? The next week, she tried a different approach. During a parent-teacher conference, she asked to speak with her teacher privately after her parents left. "Mrs. Henderson, can I tell you something?" Sarah's palms felt sweaty. "I'm worried about my mom. She's been forgetting things, a lot, like really important things, and sometimes she seems confused about what day it is or what we talked about." Mrs. Henderson, a kind woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain, listened carefully. When Sarah finished, the teacher smiled reassuringly and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Sarah, that's very thoughtful of you to be observant of your mother, but I think what you're describing is pretty normal for busy adults. Your mother runs a successful career. I'm sure she's just overwhelmed. These things pass, honey. Don't worry yourself too much about it." Sarah felt deflated. Even Mrs. Henderson didn't think it was serious. But Sarah couldn't stop noticing. It was as if someone had handed her a pair of glasses that revealed invisible patterns everyone else seemed to miss. She watched her mother more carefully now. She noticed the small confusion that flickered across face when she couldn't locate something. The way her mother sometimes paused mid-sentence, searching for a word that wouldn't come. The moments when she seemed to stare at nothing, lost in an internal fog. The worst incident came on a Friday evening. Sarah's mother's best friend had invited their family over for dinner. During the meal, the conversation turned to a vacation the two families had taken together to Falls 3 years earlier, when Sarah was just 6. "Remember how Sarah was so scared of the boat tour under the falls?" Laughed. "She cried so hard." Looked blank. "What boat tour?" "The Maid of the Mist tour," explained. "We went together, don't you remember? It was right after Michael and I celebrated our anniversary." I don't think we went on a boat tour," said slowly. "I don't remember that." Looked taken aback. "Come on, we have photos. Your family came with us. It was such a great day." His face flushed. "I'm sorry, I don't remember." Laughed it off, but Sarah saw the worry that flickered in her mother's eyes. That was the moment Sarah truly understood. Something was genuinely wrong. That night Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind churning with worry. She thought about bringing it up to her parents again, but she already knew how that conversation would go. They didn't believe her. They thought she was being dramatic, imaginative, or seeking attention. No one took her seriously. Sarah was 9 years old, and she was watching her mother slip away while the entire world remained oblivious. The knowledge sat heavy in her small chest like a stone. She had tried to warn them. She had tried to be heard, but nobody was listening. By late October, Sarah had stopped trying to convince adults and started keeping meticulous notes instead. She documented every incident, every forgotten conversation, every misplaced item, every moment of confusion. She wrote them in a blue notebook hidden beneath her mattress, creating a detailed record of the changes nobody else seemed to see. She told herself that someday, someone would look at these notes and understand. Someday, they would realize that Sarah had been right all along. She just didn't know that someday would come sooner than she imagined, and that it would take an extraordinary intervention to make anyone finally listen. Max had arrived at the Henderson household 5 years earlier as an 8-week-old golden retriever puppy, a ball of fluff with oversized paws and an appetite for chaos. He chewed through countless shoes, knocked over trash cans, and created a magnificent disaster of Sarah's childhood. But he'd also grown into the family's most beloved member. His golden coat shimmered like honey in sunlight. His brown eyes held a gentleness that made children and adults alike melt with affection. He was, in every way, the perfect family dog. Max loved routine with the dedication of a monk. Every morning at 7, he would pad into Sarah's room and rest his chin on the edge of her bed, waiting for her to wake up. During work hours, he would settle on his dog bed near his home office, contentedly snoozing while she worked. At lunch, He knew exactly when to expect the family to gather in the kitchen. At 3:30, his ears would perk up in anticipation of Sarah's arrival home from school. At 6 o'clock sharp, he would move to the kitchen entrance, waiting for dinner preparation to begin. At night, he would follow the family upstairs, settling in the hallway between the parents' room and Sarah's room, his self-appointed position as household guardian. Everything changed in early November. Sarah first noticed the shift on a Wednesday afternoon. She came home from school to find Max lying on the living room floor directly in front of her mother's home office door. This wasn't unusual. Max often napped in various locations throughout the house, but what was unusual was his alertness. Normally, the Golden would lift his head, thump his tail, and stand to greet Sarah with enthusiastic affection. That day Max barely lifted his head. His tail didn't wag. His eyes, those warm, loving eyes, were fixed on the office door, ears perked in a state of constant attention. "Max," Sarah called out concerned. She approached the dog and knelt beside him. "What's wrong, boy?" Max turned to look at her, and Sarah could have sworn she saw worry in his expression. Then he turned his gaze back to the office door and let out a small, anxious whine. Sarah pushed open the office door and saw her mother sitting at her desk, staring blankly at her computer screen. Hadn't heard Sarah enter. She was so absorbed in her thoughts, or lost in them, that she seemed completely unaware of her daughter's presence. "Mom," Sarah said gently. Jumped startled. "Oh, Sarah, you scared me. Is it already 3:30? "It's 3:45, Sarah said. "You didn't hear me come home." "I was just thinking about the Henderson campaign," said, but her voice sounded uncertain, as though she was reaching for an explanation to justify her distant behavior. Sarah backed out of the office and Max immediately stood, his tail wagging half-heartedly as he followed her to the kitchen. But even as they moved away, Sarah felt the dog's tension. Max seemed unable to relax fully. He settled on his bed, but his head remained elevated, his ears alert. Over the next few days, Max's unusual behavior intensified dramatically. The dog began shadowing from room to room. If walked to the kitchen, Max would abandon his comfortable spot and follow. If she moved to the bedroom, Max would trail behind. If she sat at the dining table for lunch, Max would position himself directly beneath her chair, not asking for food as he normally did, but simply being there, maintaining proximity. It was as though Max had appointed himself as her personal bodyguard. More alarming was the whining. Max had never been a particularly vocal dog. Occasional barks at the doorbell or the mailman, yes, but this persistent, low whining was entirely new. The sound was plaintive and desperate, like a heartbreak expressed in canine form. "Why is Max acting so weird?" Sarah's father asked one evening, noticing the dog's unusual behavior. "He's probably just going through a phase," suggested, but she looked uncomfortable. She reached down to pet Max, and the dog pressed against her leg so intensely that he nearly toppled her from her chair. Sarah watched this interaction with growing alarm. She'd read books about animals and their instincts. She'd seen documentaries about dogs that could sense when people were about to have seizures or diabetic episodes. Dogs had abilities that science was still working to understand. What if Max was sensing something with her mother? What if this behavior was actually a warning? The pivotal observation came on a Tuesday evening during dinner. Sarah's family was eating pasta when her mother suddenly froze mid-bite, her fork hovering inches from her mouth. She seemed to be searching for something, a word, a memory, a thread of thought. Her eyes went blank for 3 long seconds. Max, who had been lying under the table, suddenly bolted upright and began whining intensely. He thrust his head up beneath's dangling hand and pressed against her leg with urgent force. The moment broke, blinked, set down her fork and smiled uncertainly. "Sorry, I was just thinking about something." But Sarah had witnessed something crucial. Max's behavioral shift had preceded her mother's confusion episode by exactly 3 seconds. The dog had sensed something before it happened. From that moment on, Sarah began keeping a second notebook, one specifically documenting Max's behavior patterns. She noted the times he whined, the intensity of his shadowing, the moments when he became particularly anxious. She cross-referenced these observations with the timing of her mother's confused episodes, and a clear pattern emerged. Max always knew first. The dog possessed an almost supernatural ability to sense moments of confusion. He would begin his anxious behavior, the whining, the pressing against her leg, the refusal to leave her side, just seconds before her mother experienced a confused episode or memory lapse. It was as though Max's nervous system was receiving signals that the human nervous system was missing. One afternoon, Sarah tested her theory deliberately. She sat in the living room watching her mother, waiting for Max to start his warning behaviors. When the dog began whining and positioned himself directly in front of his paws nearly in her lap, his entire body tense with anxiety, Sarah glanced at the clock. 45 seconds later, her mother asked Sarah a question she'd asked just an hour earlier, word for word identical, as though the previous conversation had never occurred. The correlation was undeniable. Sarah tried to explain her observations to her father, pulling out her carefully documented notes and showing him the patterns she'd discovered. "Look," she said, pointing at her notebook. "Max acts nervous right before Mom gets confused. It's like he knows something's wrong before it happens." Her father examined the notes and smiled indulgently. "Sarah, that's some very careful observation, but I think you might be connecting dots that aren't really connected. Dogs are perceptive about emotions. Maybe your mom seems stressed, and Max picks up on that tension. Dogs are very intuitive about human emotions." "But it's more than just sensing emotion," Sarah protested. "It's like he's sensing something physical happening in her brain." "Well, I'm not a veterinarian, but I don't think dogs can diagnose medical conditions," her father said gently. "That's probably giving Max a little too much credit, don't you think?" Sarah felt the familiar frustration rising in her chest. Adults didn't listen. They dismissed the observations of children, even when those observations were backed by evidence and careful documentation. But Max knew. Sarah was certain of it. The dog was trying to communicate something vitally important. Every whine, every moment of anxious shadowing, every time Max refused to leave side, it was all a message. Max was crying out for help in the only way he knew how. The question was, would anyone else ever understand what the dog was trying to say? By late November, Max's behavior had become so pronounced that it was impossible to ignore entirely. Family friends would comment on it. "Your dog seems nervous around your mom," someone might observe. The veterinarian, during Max's annual checkup, asked if the dog had experienced any recent trauma or stress. But the family still didn't connect the pieces. Only Sarah truly understood, and she was beginning to suspect that if no one listened to her, then something catastrophic might happen. Max was warning them. Sarah was warning them, but nobody was paying attention to either of them. The clock was ticking, and Sarah knew, with the certainty that only a worried 9-year-old can possess, that time was running out. Tuesday morning arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of November day that felt heavy with portent. Sarah woke with an unsettled feeling in her stomach, though she couldn't quite articulate why. The sky outside her window looked troubled, clouds hanging low like they were pressing down on the earth. She didn't know it yet, but this day would become the day that changed everything. Downstairs, her mother was preparing for work with unusual energy. Moved through the kitchen in her charcoal business suit, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. She seemed more present than she had in weeks, focused and purposeful. For a moment, Sarah dared to hope that maybe everything had been her imagination. Maybe her mother was fine. Maybe Max had simply been going through a phase. Sarah was eating cereal when her mother announced cheerfully, "I'm heading to the office early today. Big meeting with the Henderson account team. I want to review my presentation one more time before everyone arrives." "Okay, Mom," Sarah said, relieved by the normalcy of the statement. "Have a good day." Kissed the top of her daughter's head and grabbed her coffee thermos. "Have a good day at school, sweetie." But something shifted the moment stepped out the front door. Sarah watched from the kitchen window as her mother walked toward the garage, car keys in hand. Max, who had been lying in his usual spot near the kitchen entrance, suddenly jerked to attention. His ears stood straight up. His body went rigid. Sarah had never seen the dog move so quickly. Max bolted from the kitchen and out through the open front door, his golden fur rippling like water. He caught up to just as she was opening the car door, and he inserted himself directly between her and the vehicle. "Max, no," said, sounding annoyed. "Get out of the way, buddy. I have to go to work." But Max didn't move. He stood there, his body blocking the car door completely, his tail still and low. His entire demeanor had transformed. The gentle, loving companion had become something else, a guardian, an enforcer, a being possessed by a mission of critical importance. Tried to gently move the dog aside. "Come on, Max. Not today, sweetheart. I really need to go." Max refused to budge. Instead, he let out a low bark, not aggressive but firm, determined. It was a bark that said, "You cannot get in this car." "Strange," muttered, stepping back. "Maybe he needs to go outside." But Max's attention remained entirely fixed on the car. When moved toward it again, Max barked more insistently and planted his large body directly in front of the driver's side door, his paws spread wide, his entire 70-pound frame a barricade. This was unprecedented. This was utterly unlike Max's usual gentle demeanor. Sarah, still standing at the kitchen window, felt her heart accelerate. Something was happening, something important. Her father, Michael, was working from his home office upstairs, designing blueprints for a commercial building project. But he heard the commotion, the unusual barking, the frustrated sounds of trying to coax Max away from the car. He came downstairs, his expression confused and mildly irritated. "What's going on?" he asked, pulling on his cardigan. "Max won't let me get in the car," said, gesturing at the dog in exasperation. "He's being absolutely ridiculous. Come here, Max, that's enough." Michael approached the car to investigate. Max turned to look at him, barked once, a sharp, demanding sound, and then repositioned himself even more firmly in front of the car door. His hackles were raised now, his body language screaming, "Something is wrong. Listen to me." "He's never done this before," Michael observed, approaching slowly. "Maybe he's sick or in pain." "He seems fine," said. "He's just being stubborn." But Sarah could see something her parents couldn't. She could read Max's behavior with a clarity that came from weeks of observation. This wasn't stubbornness. This wasn't illness or pain. This was Max's instinct, his ancient canine wisdom, his ability to perceive something invisible to human senses. Max was desperately trying to communicate a message of critical urgency. Sarah ran outside onto the driveway, her heart pounding in her chest. "Dad, don't let Mom drive." The words burst out before she'd even formed a complete thought. Michael turned to look at his daughter, startled. "What?" "Please, Dad, something's wrong. Max knows, I know, please don't let her drive." For a moment, Michael looked at his daughter with confusion and concern. But something in her voice, the genuine fear, the certainty, the desperation, made him pause. He looked at Max, who was still barricading the car, still radiating an intensity that was impossible to ignore. "Maybe we should just call your office," Michael said slowly. "Say you'll be a bit late. Something doesn't feel right." "That's ridiculous," snapped, but her voice held an edge of uncertainty. "I feel fine. Max is just being weird. Some dogs go through phases." "Mom," Sarah said, her voice shaking, "where are you going?" Paused. "To work, to my office downtown. I already told you that." "Which way do you go?" Sarah pressed. "Well, I take Riverside Drive to the..." Stopped. Her face went blank. She blinked several times as though searching through a fog. I take." She didn't finish the sentence. Instead, she stared in the direction of the street, and Sarah watched confusion wash over her mother's face like a wave. Had driven that same route to her office for 12 years, every single weekday for over a decade. But in that moment, she seemed completely lost. "I take," repeated, but she didn't complete the thought. Instead, she looked toward the end of the driveway with visible uncertainty. "Which way is downtown again?" Michael's face changed. The slight irritation transformed into something else, a dawning realization that something was genuinely wrong. He said carefully, "You know the way to your office." "Of course I do," said, but her voice wavered. She looked at the car, then back at the street, then at Michael. For a moment, I couldn't remember which direction to go. That's strange." Sarah felt tears burning her eyes. This was it. This was the moment everyone would finally understand. Max, still positioned in front of the car, let out another bark, a decisive, almost triumphant sound. He turned and looked directly at Sarah, his brown eyes locking with hers in a moment of profound connection. The dog had done it. He had stopped her mother from driving in a state of confusion. He had prevented what could have been a dangerous accident. "I think we need to call your doctor," Michael said too, his voice careful and measured. "Right now." "What? Why? I'm fine. I just had a moment of confusion. That happens to everyone." "No," Michael interrupted gently. "I don't think it does. Not like this. Not repeatedly. Not with our dog's behavior like this." He looked at Sarah, and in his eyes she saw something shift. A recognition. An acknowledgement. Finally, he was seeing what she had been trying to tell him for weeks. "Come inside," Michael said too. "We're calling Dr. Stevens right now." As Michael guided his confused wife back into the house, he turned to Sarah and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You were right," he said quietly. "I should have listened." Max followed them into the house, and for the first time in weeks, the dog seemed to relax slightly. He had communicated his message. He had made them understand. His mission, at least this part of it, was complete. Sarah knelt down and buried her face in Max's golden fur. "Good boy," she whispered. Good boy, you did it." The dog rested his chin on her shoulder, and together they sat in the foyer of their home, waiting for what would come next. Everything was about to change. The neurology clinic felt sterile and cold, all white walls and the faint smell of antiseptic that made everything seem more serious than everyday life. Sarah sat in the waiting room, her leg bouncing anxiously as she clutched her blue notebook, the one filled with meticulous observations about her mother's cognitive changes. She'd brought it as evidence, as proof that she hadn't been imagining things, as validation that she'd been paying attention when no one else was. Her mother was in the examination room with Dr. Richard Stevens, a renowned neurologist with silver hair and kind eyes. Her father sat beside the doctor's desk, looking pale and worried. Sarah had wanted to go in with them, but the adults had decided it was best if she waited outside. The waiting felt like torture. The examination had been thorough. Dr. Stevens had started with basic questions. When did the memory lapses begin? Had there been any recent head injuries? Was there a family history of Alzheimer's disease or other neurological conditions? Then he'd moved into more specific cognitive tests. He'd asked to repeat numbers in reverse order. He'd asked her to name objects in pictures. He'd asked her what year it was, what month, what day of the week. Sarah, even from her seat in the waiting room, could sense her mother's struggles through the thin walls. She heard her uncertain voice when asked to recall information she should have known immediately. She heard the frustration in her mother's tone when she couldn't quite access information that felt like it should be right there, just beyond her mental reach. Now, 30 minutes into the appointment, Sarah waited. The walls of the waiting room were covered with pamphlets about various neurological conditions: Parkinson's disease, stroke prevention, multiple sclerosis, traumatic brain injury, dementia. Sarah's eyes kept returning to the dementia pamphlet. She'd looked up the word in the dictionary at school. It meant a general decline in mental abilities, particularly memory loss. The pamphlet's cover featured an elderly man looking confused while a younger woman held his hand supportively. That could be her mother. That could be their family. The fear sitting in Sarah's chest was enormous and heavy. She wanted to know what was wrong. She needed to know, but the thought of what the answer might be terrified her completely. An hour passed, then 90 minutes. Sarah had read through 3 separate pamphlets, solved the puzzle cube in the waiting room, and mentally recited the periodic table of elements, something she'd memorized for school twice. She was starting to wonder if something had gone wrong when the examination room door opened. Her father emerged first, and Sarah knew immediately from his expression that the news was significant. Michael looked older somehow, like the appointment had added 5 years to his face in a single afternoon. He sat down beside Sarah without speaking, and she could see him struggling for words. Then Dr. Stevens emerged, his face professionally neutral but kind. "Sarah, would you like to come back and hear what I've found?" Sarah nodded, her throat suddenly dry. She clutched her notebook to her chest like a shield as she followed the doctor back to the examination room. Her mother was sitting on the examination table, her legs dangling, looking smaller than usual. Eyes were red-rimmed, though she wasn't actively crying. She reached out and pulled Sarah close when her daughter entered the room. "Okay," Dr. Stevens said, settling into his chair and gesturing for Sarah to sit. "I've completed a comprehensive evaluation, including cognitive testing, blood work, and a preliminary brain scan. Based on all the evidence I've gathered, and based on what your family has reported, I believe is experiencing early-stage Alzheimer's disease." The words hung in the air like a funeral bell. Alzheimer's disease, it wasn't just confusion, it wasn't stress, it wasn't temporary forgetfulness. "Are you sure?" Michael asked, though his voice suggested he already knew the answer was yes. "As sure as we can be at this stage," Dr. Stevens said gently. "The cognitive testing shows significant memory impairment, particularly in short-term memory. She's having difficulty with recall and attention. The blood work rules out other causes like vitamin deficiencies or thyroid problems, and the brain scan shows some atrophy consistent with early Alzheimer's." Sarah felt her mother's arm tight around her shoulders. "How is this possible?" asked, her voice shaking. "I'm only 47 years old. Isn't Alzheimer's something that happens to elderly people?" "Alzheimer's disease can develop in younger people," Dr. Stevens explained patiently. "It's called early-onset Alzheimer's, and while it's less common than the late-onset form, it does occur. The disease progresses at different rates in different people, but early intervention is absolutely crucial." Dr. Stevens turned to look at Sarah directly. "I want to commend you," he said. "Your family told me that you've been documenting your mother's symptoms for several weeks. Your observations were remarkably accurate and detailed. You noted specific incidents and patterns that were extremely helpful in confirming this diagnosis." Sarah felt tears slide down her cheeks, but they weren't entirely sad tears. There was vindication in them, relief, recognition. "The early detection is significant," Dr. Stevens continued, now addressing the whole family. "Many patients don't receive a diagnosis until they're already experiencing moderate cognitive decline. By that point, treatment options are more limited. But because you caught this early, because you recognized the symptoms and sought medical attention, we have more options available to us." "What kind of treatment?" Michael asked. "There are medications that can help slow the progression of cognitive decline," Dr. Stevens explained. "I'll be prescribing something called a cholinesterase inhibitor. There are also clinical trials for newer treatments that are showing promise. Additionally, cognitive therapy, lifestyle modifications, and family support are all important components of treatment." "Will she get better?" Sarah asked quietly. Dr. Stevens looked at her with compassion. "Alzheimer's is a progressive disease, so we can't reverse the damage that's already been done. But with early intervention and treatment, we can potentially slow down the progression. That means your mother may maintain her cognitive abilities for a longer period of time than she would without treatment. That time is precious, and it's time you've gained by getting this diagnosis early. Sarah looked at her mother and was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. But there was also something like relief in her expression. Finally, she had an explanation. Finally, everyone understood. "I want a schedule for weekly appointments initially," Dr. Stevens said, pulling out his prescription pad. "We'll monitor her response to medication. I'll also refer you to a cognitive therapist and a support group for families dealing with early-onset Alzheimer's. This is going to be a journey, but you've already shown remarkable strength and awareness." As they left the clinic, walking out into the gray November afternoon, Sarah felt oddly numb. The diagnosis was real. Her mother was ill. This was actually happening. But she'd also been right. All along, despite everyone dismissing her, despite adults telling her she was overreacting or using her imagination, she had been absolutely right. In the car on the way home, her mother turned around from the front seat to look at Sarah. "I'm sorry," said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry I didn't believe you. I'm sorry I got frustrated with you for worrying. You tried to tell me something was wrong and I didn't listen." "You listen now," Sarah said simply. "I do," agreed. "And I'm grateful, so grateful. You saved my life, Sarah, or at least you saved my future." When they arrived home, Max was waiting at the door, his entire body wriggling with the need to greet them. He went directly to and rested his head against her leg, his tail wagging gently. "You helped too, buddy," Sarah whispered, kneeling down to hug the dog. "You helped us all understand." That evening, as Sarah lay in bed, she thought about the last few months, all the frustration of not being heard, all the worry she'd carried alone, all the meticulous notes she'd taken while adults dismissed her concerns. And now, finally, everything made sense. The diagnosis was serious. The journey ahead would be difficult, but at least now they could move forward with knowledge and treatment and hope. Sarah had been right all along, and soon the entire world would know it too. The news spread through Sarah's elementary school like wildfire through dry grass. By Wednesday morning, 2 days after her mother's diagnosis, Sarah found herself the center of unprecedented attention. Kids who had never spoken to her suddenly wanted to be her friend. Teachers looked at her differently, not as a student, but as someone notable, someone worth paying attention to. It started in her homeroom when Mrs. Henderson called Sarah up to her desk before the morning bell rang. "Sarah, I owe you an apology," Mrs. Henderson said, and Sarah could see genuine remorse in her expression. "When you came to me weeks ago and told me you were worried about your mother, I dismissed your concerns. I told you that adults forget things all the time. I was wrong to do that. I should have taken you seriously." Sarah felt her cheeks flush. Part of her wanted to say, "I told you so," but that didn't feel right. Mrs. Henderson's apology was sincere, and Sarah could see how much it cost her to admit she'd been wrong. "It's okay," Sarah said quietly. "You didn't know." "Still," Mrs. Henderson continued, "you showed remarkable maturity and observation skills. Those are qualities we should encourage in young people, not dismiss. I'm going to do better." The apologies continued throughout the day. Sarah's art teacher stopped her in the hallway. Sarah's math teacher asked to speak with her privately. The school librarian told her she was proud of her vigilance. Each interaction felt surreal, like Sarah had stepped into an alternate universe where children were suddenly respected and believed. That evening, Sarah's father received a call from a producer at the local NBC affiliate. Somehow, the story had gotten out. Sarah's mother's early-onset Alzheimer's diagnosis. The 9-year-old girl who noticed the symptoms when medical professionals and family members had missed them. The dog who'd heroically prevented a dangerous situation. "We'd like to do a feature on your family," the producer explained. "This is an inspiring human interest story. A child who was listened to could change how people approach early warning signs. And your dog's behavior is remarkable. We'd love to include that element." Michael and looked at each other with uncertainty. Sarah watched her parents grapple with the decision. Exposure felt vulnerable, but it also felt important. "What do you think, Sarah?" her mother asked. Sarah thought about all the times she tried to tell adults something was wrong and hadn't been believed. She thought about how different things might have been if someone had listened immediately. She thought about other families who might be experiencing similar situations right now, children noticing changes in their parents that adults were dismissing. "I think we should do it," Sarah said. "Maybe it will help someone else." The local news crew arrived on Saturday morning, transforming their modest suburban home into a television production. Cameras and lights and recording equipment filled their living room. The producer, a woman named with warm eyes and an efficient demeanor, walked the family through what would happen. "We'll start with some B-roll of your home, your family together, you with Max. Then we'll do individual interviews. Sarah, we'd like to film you with your notebook, the one where you documented your mother's symptoms. Is that okay?" Sarah nodded, feeling both nervous and oddly mature. The interview started with, asked gentle questions about when she first noticed something was wrong, how confusing it had been, how relieved she felt to finally have answers. Spoke about her fear and her gratitude for her family's vigilance. Then it was Michael's turn. He talked about initially dismissing his daughter's concerns, about the shame he felt for not taking a child seriously when she was providing accurate information. "My 9-year-old daughter was more observant than I was," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I was too caught up in my own assumptions about what normal forgetfulness looks like. I'm grateful every single day that she refused to let it go, that she kept documenting what she was seeing, that she trusted her own observations even when adults told her she was wrong." Then came Sarah's interview. Sat across from her, the camera rolling, and asked, "When did you first know something was wrong with your mom?" Sarah spoke carefully, describing the forgotten appointments, the repeated conversations, the confused moment in the driveway. She talked about the frustration of not being believed. She held up her blue notebook and showed the pages filled with her careful observations. "Why did you keep writing things down if people weren't listening?" asked. "Because I knew I was right," Sarah said simply. "Even when nobody believed me, I knew something was wrong. I thought if I kept documenting it, eventually someone would understand." The camera panned to Max, who was lying peacefully on his dog bed, occasionally lifting his head to look at Sarah with his warm brown eyes. "And this is Max," narrated, "the family dog who played a crucial role in the diagnosis. Can you tell us about what happened that morning?" Sarah described how Max had refused to let her mother get in the car. She talked about the dog's unusual behavior over the weeks leading up to it, the constant shadowing, the anxious whining, the way he seemed to sense her mother's confusion episodes before they happened. "Do you think Max knew your mom was sick?" asked. "I think Max knew something was wrong," Sarah said. "I don't know if he understood it was a disease or anything like that, but he definitely sensed that my mom needed help. He was trying to protect her." The segment aired on Wednesday evening during the 6 o'clock news. Sarah's family gathered in the living room to watch themselves on television. Seeing her mother's face on the screen, hearing her own voice reporting on what she'd observed, watching Max's peaceful expression as the narrator described his heroic intervention, it all felt simultaneously foreign and deeply real. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. By Thursday morning, the story had been picked up by regional news outlets. By Friday, it had spread to national media. The headline dominated social media: 9-year-old girl and her dog save mother's life. Early detection of Alzheimer's CHANGES everything. Emails poured in from around the country. Parents wrote about their own children who'd noticed changes in aging relatives. Medical professionals thanked Sarah for raising awareness about early-onset Alzheimer's. People shared stories about their own family's struggles with the disease. Sarah's school held an assembly on Monday morning. The principal, Mr., called Sarah to the stage and presented her with a certificate of recognition. Sarah Henderson represents the very best of what this school stands for, he announced to the entire student body. She demonstrated courage, persistence, careful observation, and the wisdom to trust herself even when adults didn't believe her. She also showed compassion, not gloating when she was proved right, but focusing on helping her family get the medical care they needed. We are proud to recognize Sarah as our Student of the Month, with honors. The entire school erupted in applause. Sarah's cheeks burned as she stood on the stage, clutching her certificate. She looked out at the sea of faces, teachers who had dismissed her, friends who hadn't known, peers who suddenly wanted to be part of her story. That evening, her mother found her in her bedroom. "Hi, baby," said, sitting on the edge of Sarah's bed. "Are you okay with all the attention?" "I think so," Sarah said. "It's weird, but I'm glad if it helps people." "You've been so brave," her mother said, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind Sarah's ear. "And so right. I want you to know that I'm sorry again. I'm sorry I didn't listen. I'm sorry I made you feel like you weren't being heard." "You listen now," Sarah said, echoing her words from days before. "I do," agreed, "and I always will." That night, Sarah lay in bed thinking about the journey that had led to this moment. The months of worry, the careful documentation, the repeated dismissals, the frustration of being a child in a world that didn't take children seriously, the fear she'd carried alone, the certainty that something was wrong even when every adult told her she was imagining things. And then Max, loyal, intuitive, brave Max, the dog who'd known something was wrong even before Sarah had concrete evidence, the dog who'd put his own body between danger and the person he loved. Together, they'd changed everything. The phone rang throughout the evening, requests for interviews, invitations to speak at medical conferences, offers from documentary producers who wanted to tell their story in depth. Sarah's father fielded calls, his voice growing increasingly overwhelmed. By the time Sarah fell asleep, she understood something fundamental. The world was paying attention now, and more importantly, she'd learned that being young didn't mean being powerless. That careful observation mattered. That refusing to be silenced could literally change lives. She'd been right all along, and now everyone knew it. The first medication arrived on a Thursday afternoon, a small white bottle containing pills that represented hope and possibility. Dr. Stevens had prescribed a cholinesterase inhibitor called, along with vitamin supplements, and a referral to a clinical trial for a newer experimental treatment that was showing promising results in slowing cognitive decline. Held the pill bottle in her hand like it was made of glass, like it might shatter if she gripped it too tightly. "This is the beginning," Dr. Stevens had told her. "The beginning of us fighting back against what's happening in your brain. This medication won't cure the disease, but it can help preserve your cognitive function. Combined with the lifestyle modifications, the therapy, and the support of your family, we have a real chance at extending the quality of your life significantly." The first week of medication was uneventful. Took her pill each morning with breakfast, watching her family to see if anything miraculous happened. It didn't. There was no sudden clarity, no dramatic reversal of symptoms. The disease didn't vanish, but something subtle began to shift. Sarah noticed it first, naturally. She'd been observing her mother so carefully for so long that she could detect the smallest changes. On the second week of medication, her mother retained information more consistently. She remembered Sarah's soccer practice schedule without checking the calendar. She didn't repeat the same story at dinner. Her confusion episodes became less frequent. "I think it's working," Sarah whispered to Max one afternoon, burying her face in the dog's golden fur. "I think the medicine is actually helping." The clinical trial enrollment process took another 2 weeks. Underwent extensive testing to ensure she was a suitable candidate. Blood work, cognitive assessments, brain imaging, genetic testing. The medical team wanted to establish a comprehensive baseline so they could measure her progress accurately. "Your mother was caught at an ideal stage for the trial," Dr. Stevens explained to Michael and Sarah during one appointment. "Often, patients don't receive an early-onset Alzheimer's diagnosis until they're already experiencing significant cognitive decline. By that point, it's harder for treatment to make an impact, but is still in the early stages. Her brain has more reserve capacity. That gives us a better chance of the medication being effective." Sarah listened intently, her notebook in her lap, documenting the doctor's words. This was important information. This was how science worked: careful observation, meticulous documentation, treatment and measurement. The medication adjustment period lasted 6 weeks. Dr. Stevens gradually increased dose, monitoring for side effects and cognitive changes. The family kept a detailed log of her symptoms, her memory function, her mood, her energy levels. They noted everything. By week 4, the changes became more pronounced. His memory for recent events improved noticeably. She began retaining new information more reliably. Her confusion episodes, while not entirely eliminated, decreased in frequency and intensity. She had more moments of clarity, more stretches of time where she felt like herself. "I can think again," said one evening, tears in her eyes. "It's like there was this fog in my brain and suddenly someone switched on a light." Sarah's father squeezed his wife's hand. "We caught it early enough." "We caught it because of Sarah," said, looking at her daughter. "Because our daughter refused to be dismissed." By the 3rd month of treatment, enrolled in cognitive therapy sessions twice a week. The therapist, a woman named Dr. Lisa who specialized in dementia care, worked with on memory techniques, problem-solving strategies, and cognitive exercises designed to maximize her remaining cognitive capacity. "The key is engagement," Doctor explained to the family. "We want to keep her brain as active and stimulated as possible. Reading, puzzles, learning new things, social engagement, all of these can help maintain cognitive function." Sarah and her mother began doing crossword puzzles together every evening. They took up painting as a hobby, started a book club. Michael took his wife to museums and cultural events. The family understood that this wasn't just about medication. It was about creating an environment that supported cognitive health. 6 months into treatment, returned to Dr. Stevens for comprehensive testing to evaluate the medication's effectiveness. The results were remarkable. "Your cognitive test scores have actually improved slightly since we started treatment," Dr. Stevens said, his voice filled with quiet amazement. "That's not common. Usually we're hopping just to slow decline, but you seem to be stabilizing and even showing some improvement in certain areas. The medication, combined with the therapy, the lifestyle changes, and your family's support, is working." His eyes filled with tears. Michael reached over and took her hand. "How much time has this bought her?" Michael asked carefully. "That's difficult to predict precisely," Dr. Stevens said. "But based on the progression patterns we're seeing, I'd estimate we've potentially extended her period of good cognitive function by years. Years where she can maintain her quality of life, her independence, her ability to make decisions and be present in her family. That's significant." Sarah sat in that office and felt something shift inside her chest. The nightmare that had seemed so insurmountable months ago, her mother fading away, becoming someone else, losing her mind to a disease that had no cure, seemed slightly more manageable now. Not gone, but managed, slowed, fought against. The experimental medication added another layer of hope. Was one of 200 patients in a nationwide trial of a drug that targeted the underlying pathology of Alzheimer's disease. Monthly appointments became routine. Blood draws, cognitive tests, brain scans. Her family became experts in medical terminology. They learned about amyloid plaques and tau tangles. They understood the difference between short-term and long-term memory. They absorbed an education in neurodegenerative disease. One afternoon, As Sarah was doing homework at the kitchen table while her mother prepared dinner, turned to her daughter and smiled. "Do you know what day it is?" asked. "Thursday," Sarah said, looking up from her algebra assignment. "It's Thursday, December 15th, said, and a year ago I couldn't remember what day of the week it was. A year ago I was losing myself. But now," she paused, stirring the pasta sauce with more presence than Sarah had witnessed in months. "Now I'm still here." "You're still here," Sarah agreed, feeling gratitude wash through her like a wave. The family's Thanksgiving that year felt different from previous years, was present in a way that felt fully real. She engaged in conversations without losing the thread. She helped cook without forgetting what she was doing. She participated fully in the holiday. "This is a gift," told her family as they sat around the dinner table. "This time, this clarity, it's a gift, and I know I have to thank my daughter for it." Sarah felt her cheeks flush, but she also felt something deeper, a sense of purpose, of having done something that mattered, of having changed her family's trajectory through persistence and careful observation. In the months that followed, Sarah's mother continued to stabilize. The disease didn't disappear. Early-onset Alzheimer's was still a serious, progressive condition, but the forward momentum of decline had been arrested, existed in a plateau of relative stability, able to maintain her cognitive function at a level that allowed her to live meaningfully. Sarah attended Dr. Stevens' office one afternoon and found him reviewing his file with another neurologist. "This is the case I was telling you about," Dr. Stevens said, gesturing to his medical records. 9-year-old daughter recognized the symptoms, documented them meticulously, and convinced her family to seek medical attention early. "We caught this disease at stage 1 and began treatment immediately. The difference early intervention makes is extraordinary." The other neurologist examined the charts. "This is remarkable. Most early-onset cases arrive at diagnosis when they're already in stage 2 or 3. "Exactly," Dr. Stevens agreed. "This family's vigilance, particularly this young girl's vigilance, bought her mother years. Years of cognitive clarity, years of being present with her family, years of living rather than deteriorating. It's a powerful reminder of why early detection matters so much in Alzheimer's disease." Sarah listened from her seat in the waiting room, feeling the weight and importance of what she'd done. She'd given her mother time, precious, irreplaceable time, time to make memories with her family, time to live. That evening, she sat with Max on the back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "We did it," she whispered to the dog. "We actually did it. We saved her." Max rested his head on her lap, his brown eyes warm and knowing. Somehow, the dog seemed to understand. He'd known something was wrong long before any medical test could confirm it. His instinct, his ancient canine wisdom, had started this entire chain of events. Together, they'd changed everything. And now, for the first time, it felt like they'd actually won. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, addressed to the entire Henderson family. It was from Dr., a renowned animal behaviorist at Ohio State University who specialized in studying human-animal bonds and dogs' ability to detect medical emergencies. "I've been following your family's story with great interest," Doctor wrote. "Your golden retriever's apparent ability to sense cognitive decline in your wife is remarkable and poorly understood. I would like to propose a research study examining Max's behavior and sensory capabilities. This research could have significant implications for early disease detection across multiple neurological conditions. Would your family be interested in participating?" Michael showed the email to and Sarah. All three looked at Max, who was lying peacefully on the kitchen floor, apparently unaware that he was about to become the subject of serious scientific inquiry. "What do you think?" asked Sarah. "Should we let scientists study our dog?" Sarah thought about the months she'd spent trying to convince adults that something was wrong, how frustrated she'd felt being dismissed. She thought about Max's mysterious abilities, how the dog had known something was wrong before any medical professional could confirm it. She thought about other families who might be struggling with early warning signs of serious diseases. "I think we should," Sarah said. "If it helps people understand their dogs better, if it helps save other people's parents, I think Max would want to help." The research began in January, 3 months after his diagnosis. Doctor arrived at the Henderson home with a team of assistants carrying video equipment, sensors, and various monitoring devices. They set up cameras in multiple rooms of the house, installed motion detectors, and placed recording devices that would capture both audio and video of Max's behavior in his natural home environment. "We're going to film Max's daily interactions with your family over the course of 3 months, Doctor explained. "We'll pay particular attention to his behavior around and any episodes of cognitive confusion. We're trying to establish whether Max's behavioral responses are genuinely linked to cognitive episodes, or whether this might be coincidence or misinterpretation on the part of observers." They also brought equipment to measure Max's biometric data, his heart rate, his body temperature, his stress levels through cortisol testing. They wanted to understand if the dog's body was responding physically to something about its condition. "Dogs have an incredibly sophisticated sense of smell," Doctor explained during one session with Sarah. "They can detect changes in human chemistry that are completely imperceptible to us. It's possible that when your mother is experiencing a moment of cognitive confusion, there are actual biochemical changes occurring in her body, changes in hormone levels, neurotransmitter production, even the chemical composition of her breath. Max might be detecting these changes through his sense of smell, or through his ability to read subtle changes in your mother's body language and behavior." Sarah found this information fascinating. She asked detailed questions about the research process, about what scientists knew and didn't know about canine sensory abilities. She even began keeping a new notebook documenting the research itself. The 3-month study period was intensive. The Henderson family had to maintain a detailed log of cognitive episodes. They noted the time, the nature of the confusion, the circumstances surrounding it. Simultaneously, they documented Max's behavior, when he began his anxious alerting, how long it lasted, the intensity of his response. The correlation was undeniable and astonishing. In 98% of recorded cognitive episodes, Max's behavioral alerting preceded the episode by an average of 43 seconds. The dog was sensing something, consistently and reliably, before any cognitive changes were observable to human observers. In March, Doctor presented preliminary findings at an animal behavior conference. The presentation attracted significant attention from the scientific community. Other researchers wanted to collaborate. Universities wanted to fund larger studies. The story of Max's remarkable abilities spread through academic circles and began appearing in scientific journals. A documentary filmmaker named Robert reached out to the family with a proposal. "I want to make a full-length documentary about your story," he said. "Not just about your mother's diagnosis, but about Max's abilities, the science behind it, and what this means for future disease detection. I think this story could help millions of people." Sarah and her family agreed, and Robert spent the next 6 months following them around with a camera crew. He filmed Sarah at school, at her cognitive therapy sessions, Michael at his architecture firm, and Max being Max. But now, instead of just a beloved family dog, Max was a research subject, a media star, and potentially a pioneer in a new field of medical science. The documentary premiered at a film festival in New York to significant acclaim. Critics praised its emotional depth and scientific accuracy. The film raised important questions about early disease detection, about listening to children's observations, about the remarkable abilities of animals to sense human illness. After the premiere, universities began reaching out with invitations for Sarah to speak. The American Geriatric Society wanted her to present at a major conference. Medical schools wanted her to participate in panels about early-onset Alzheimer's. Sarah, who had been ignored and dismissed just a year earlier, was now being sought out as an expert voice. "I'm only 10 years old," Sarah protested when her parents told her about some of the requests. "You're also the person who recognized symptoms that medical professionals initially missed," her father pointed out. "Your experience matters, Sarah. Your observations matter." Max's research expanded rapidly. Doctor received a significant grant to conduct a larger study involving 50 dogs and their owners, some with early cognitive decline, some without. The goal was to determine whether Max's abilities were unique or whether many dogs possessed this latent capability. The results were striking. Approximately 37% of the dogs in the study showed behavioral responses similar to Max's, consistently alerting to cognitive episodes in their owners before they happened. This suggested that Max wasn't unique. He was demonstrating an ability that many dogs possessed, but that had never been formally documented or studied. "This could revolutionize early disease detection," Doctor announced at a press conference. "If we can train dogs to reliably alert to early signs of Alzheimer's disease, we could dramatically increase the number of patients who receive early diagnosis and treatment. Early intervention is crucial in Alzheimer's care, and having trained alert dogs could identify people at risk years before symptoms become obvious." The research led to the establishment of a new program, Alert Dogs for Neurological Decline. Organizations began training dogs specifically to alert to cognitive changes in elderly individuals and those at risk for dementia. The program was modeled on existing alert dog programs for diabetes and seizure disorders, but with a neurological focus. Max became the face of this movement. He appeared on the cover of medical journals. He was invited to medical conferences. Documentary filmmakers wanted to feature him. Children's hospitals asked if he could visit pediatric wards to inspire young patients. Universities requested him as a teaching tool for veterinary and medical students. But Max, blissfully unaware of his scientific significance, remained exactly what he'd always been: a gentle, loving family dog who followed around the house and slept peacefully on the living room floor. "He's still just Max to us," Sarah told a journalist who was interviewing her about the research. "He doesn't know he's famous. He doesn't understand that his behavior is helping scientists understand Alzheimer's disease better. He just knew that something was wrong with my mom and he tried to help. That's all he's ever been trying to do." Sarah's school installed a permanent exhibit in the library featuring the story of Max and early-onset Alzheimer's disease detection. The exhibit included photographs, documents from the research study, and a video of Max in action. Other schools requested copies of the materials to educate their students. By Sarah's 11th birthday, Max had become more than just a pet. He was a research pioneer, a teaching tool, an inspiration for scientific advancement. His story had contributed to a fundamental shift in how the scientific community approached human-animal bonds and the detection of neurological disease. But the most remarkable thing about Max's legacy wasn't what he'd done for science. It was what he'd done for Sarah's mother. Every extra day of clarity experienced, every moment she could spend fully present with her family, every cognitive ability she retained, all of that was because Max had the courage to insist that something was wrong, and because a young girl had the wisdom to believe him. "Max saved my life," said simply during an interview about the research. "Not from physical harm, but from the terrible trajectory of early-onset Alzheimer's. He gave me time. He gave my family time. And now, through the research and the training of new alert dogs, he's giving time to other families too." Max wagged his tail at the mention of his name, apparently satisfied that his job was complete. He'd done what he set out to do. He'd protected his family. And in doing so, he changed the world. 2 years had passed since that fateful morning when Max refused to let her mother get into the car. 2 years since the diagnosis that had seemed so devastating had become, instead, a catalyst for transformation. Sarah stood in the auditorium of her middle school, microphone in hand, preparing to speak to an assembly of 600 students, all watching her with quiet attention. She was 11 years old now, no longer quite the frightened 9-year-old who had desperately tried to convince adults that something was wrong. Her hair was longer, her voice deeper, her confidence noticeably stronger. But her core mission remained the same: to help people understand the importance of listening to children's observations and concerns. 2 years ago, I noticed something was wrong with my mom, Sarah began, her voice steady and clear. But when I tried to tell adults about it, nobody believed me. My dad said everyone forgets things. My teacher told me I was overreacting. My family's friends dismissed my concerns. I was 9 years old and I felt completely invisible. The auditorium was silent. Hundreds of middle school students hung on every word. But I kept paying attention anyway, Sarah continued. I kept documenting what I saw, and I kept trying to tell people, even though nobody was listening. Eventually, my mom got sick enough that adults finally had to take me seriously. She had early-onset Alzheimer's disease, and if we'd caught it even 6 months later, her treatment options would have been much more limited. Sarah paused, letting that reality sink in. What I want to tell you is 2 things. First, if you're a young person watching this, trust your own observations. Trust yourself. You're not too young to notice important things. You're not too inexperienced to have valid concerns. Your voice matters even if adults aren't listening right now. She looked directly at the camera that was recording this for the school's YouTube channel. Second, if you're an adult watching this, listen to the children in your life. Really listen. Not with the assumption that they're overreacting or being dramatic, but with genuine openness to what they might be observing. A child might notice something you're too stressed or distracted to see, and that observation could save a life. When Sarah finished speaking, the entire auditorium erupted in applause. Teachers were nodding. Students were standing. Some were crying. The power of a young person who had learned to trust herself and speak her truth resonated with everyone who witnessed it. In the months that followed, Sarah's school implemented Sarah's Rule, a policy that required teachers to take seriously any health or safety concerns raised by students, rather than immediately dismissing them. The school also created a wellness committee that included student representatives, recognizing that young people had valuable perspectives to contribute to discussions about school health and safety. Other schools heard about the initiative and requested information about implementing similar policies. Within a year, 17 schools across Ohio had adopted Sarah's Rule. The concept began spreading nationally, appearing in education journals and at teacher conferences. But Sarah's advocacy extended far beyond school policy. She partnered with the Alzheimer's Association to create educational materials specifically designed for young people about early warning signs of cognitive decline. She worked with pediatricians to develop a pamphlet encouraging parents to listen when their children expressed health concerns. She visited nursing homes and senior centers, speaking to elderly residents and their families about the importance of early detection. "I never expected any of this," Sarah told her mother one evening as they worked on a puzzle together at the kitchen table. Cognitive function remained stable, her memory relatively preserved thanks to early intervention and ongoing treatment. "You just did what needed to be done," said, placing a puzzle piece with deliberate care. "You noticed something was wrong. You documented it. You refused to give up. And then you found a way to help other people avoid the same experience." "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked. "Getting diagnosed, having to deal with Alzheimer's disease?" Considered the question carefully. "I regret having the disease. I regret that early-onset Alzheimer's exists at all, but I don't regret the diagnosis, because if it weren't for you catching the early signs, I'd be much further along in the disease progression by now. I'd probably be unable to work. I might be in a care facility. I might have lost so much more. She reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. Instead, I get this. I get to work part-time. I get to be present with my family. I get to live. Max, now 9 years old and slowing down slightly with age, rested his head on Slap. lap. The dog had aged gracefully, his golden coat fatting slightly to cream in places, his movement less energetic than it once was, but his devotion to remained unchanged. Every morning he still positioned himself near her. Every moment she seemed confused, he still offered his quiet, steadying presence. And Max, Sarah said, looking at the dog, Max became a celebrity. Indeed, Max had. The Alert Dogs for Neurological Decline program had expanded significantly. 20 dogs had been trained specifically to alert to early signs of cognitive decline in their owners. The success rate was remarkable. Over 90% of trained dogs showed behavioral responses to cognitive episodes in their handlers, similar to Max's original behavior. Other research had emerged showing that dogs could also be trained to alert to other neurological conditions. Researchers were investigating whether alert dogs could detect early signs of Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, and even certain types of cancer through changes in human biochemistry that humans couldn't perceive, but dogs could. Max had appeared in a talk about human-animal bonds. He'd been featured in medical school curricula. Children's hospitals had created visiting programs where dogs trained to alert to medical conditions would interact with pediatric patients, teaching them about the remarkable abilities of animals. In her spare time, Sarah had become involved with the training program, helping to identify and work with dogs who showed the natural inclination to alert. She discovered that she had a gift for understanding canine behavior, for recognizing which dogs possessed the intuitive ability to sense human health changes. I want to be a veterinary behaviorist, Sarah told her parents one evening, or maybe a researcher studying human-animal bonds. There's so much we still don't understand about how dogs perceive the world. You'd be excellent at that, her father said. You have the observational skills, the patience, and the passion for understanding how dogs perceive things that other people might miss. 3 years after her mother's diagnosis, Sarah stood at the podium of a major medical conference, presenting research alongside Doctor about the implications of alert dog training for early disease detection. She was 13 years old, the youngest presenter at the conference, and the medical professionals in the auditorium listened with the kind of respect they reserved for accomplished researchers. The case of my mother, Henderson, is unique in that the early warning signs were detected by both a trained observer, myself, and an untrained animal observer, our dog Max, Sarah presented, showing slides of her mother's medical journey. What this case demonstrates is that early detection of Alzheimer's disease is possible through multiple pathways, but it requires a cultural shift toward taking young observers seriously and toward understanding the sophisticated sensory abilities of animals. She paused, looking out at the sea of medical professionals. We need to create systems where children's health observations are taken seriously. We need to invest in research about animal-assisted early disease detection. And we need to recognize that sometimes the most important medical insights come from unexpected sources. The presentation received a standing ovation. That evening, Sarah sat with Max on the back porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the sky in familiar shades of orange and pink. Her mother was inside, working on a crossword puzzle, something she could still do with relative ease, thanks to the early intervention and ongoing treatment. "We did it, buddy," Sarah whispered, running her fingers through Max's golden fur. "We really did change things." Max rested his head against her leg, his brown eyes warm and knowing. The dog had saved his family. He'd inspired a young girl to trust herself. He'd contributed to scientific advancement. He'd helped establish a new field of medical research. But perhaps most importantly, he'd shown the world that sometimes, the people, and animals, we least expect to have answers are exactly the ones who understand what matters most. Sarah thought about the girl she'd been 2 years ago, worried, frustrated, desperate to be heard. That girl had persisted. She'd trusted her own observations. She'd refused to be silenced. And in doing so, she'd changed everything. Not just for her mother, not just for Max, but for families everywhere who would now have access to better tools for early disease detection, for dogs who would be trained to alert people to life-threatening conditions, for children who would be listened to and believed and respected for their observations and concerns. Sarah Henderson had learned something fundamental about herself. Being young didn't mean being powerless. Being a child didn't mean your voice didn't matter. Sometimes, the most important voices in the room belonged to those we'd been taught to dismiss. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky faded to twilight, Sarah hugged Max close and smiled. The girl who nobody had taken seriously had, through persistence and courage and the loyalty of an extraordinary dog, changed the world. And the best part, she was just getting started.